Hello and welcome to Resource Recycling Systems webinar on building and protecting access to recycling. We are going to get started in just a couple minutes. It looks like we still have a number of folks logging on. So if you'll just hold tight, we'll get started in a minute or two. Thanks. Okay, welcome. Thanks to all of you for joining us today for the first in our webinar series by our new initiative, Renew. I'll say a few words in a minute introducing Renew and what we're doing with this new initiative. Today's webinar is about building and protecting access to recycling, and we have some great speakers today who will share with you some ideas and programs that are out there for communities interested in expanding recycling access. So before we get started, a few quick technical details. Most of you have probably been on GoToWebinars before, so you'll understand that you can hear all of us, but we can't hear you. We have you muted intentionally to keep background noise down. We do want to hear from you, and we would like you to submit your questions through the question box, or ask if you have any issues or concerns, let us know in the chat box. But we won't be hearing your voices today, unfortunately. The control panel on the right gives you all of the controls you need to control your phone and voice settings. And again, we hope you have some questions as we go through the webinar. We'll ask any questions of clarification of each speaker after their presentation, but we'll save most of the substantive questions till the end and hopefully get some good conversation going among our speakers on some of the issues you want to learn more about. And lastly, we have a recording of this session that'll be available as soon as the webinar is over, or shortly after the webinar is over. So let me introduce Renew. Renew is a new initiative that RRS is bringing forward with the support of the Carton Council. We're working to bring together industry groups and municipalities to implement collaborative programs that advance recycling. We all have heard a lot about the challenges of recycling. There's a lot of negative stories out there. Markets are tough, costs are rising, and it's a tough time for our industry and for our municipal programs. But what we don't always hear about is that there are industry programs out there that can help you solve problems, that can help you build resilient programs, and can help you overcome some of the challenges that your municipal programs face on a daily basis. So the purpose of this webinar series is to bring forward for you a number of the programs that are out there that you can take advantage of, and some of the industry initiatives to help advance recycling in communities around the country. So today, this is a part of a series. So today's webinar will focus on access to recycling, improving access to recycling, and we have 2 more coming up. On November 16th, we'll be featuring programs that focus on partnering with schools and businesses and institutions. So we'll be hearing about the Carton Council Schools Program, the APR Grocery Store Rigid Plastic Recycling Program, and a joint program of Fisher Recycling and Strategic Materials to provide bar and restaurant recycling for glass. And then on December 5th, we'll be hosting a webinar around industry problem solving. So these are new solutions that industry folks have come up with to solve challenging programs. So we'll hear from Jan Raymond at Rewall, from Sherry Jackson with the ACC's WRAP program around film plastics, and Andrew Mangan and John Bradburn around the U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development's Materials Marketplace program. And the series will continue with the 4th webinar, which will come in January, on partnerships for leading practices, and you'll hear more about that. So to learn more about Renew and to make sure that you are on the list for these upcoming webinars, email us at renew@recycle.com, and we'll be sure to keep you in the loop. So today's program is around access to recycling for different materials. So first we'll be hearing about cartons from Jason Peltz from the Carton Council. Lynn Dyer of the Foodservice Packaging Institute will talk about food service packaging recycling. And John Lair with Momentum Recycling, and Bill Dillerman with Miller Coors and the Rocky Mountain Brewing Company will talk to us about some glass recycling efforts they've had out in Denver. At the end, we'll come back and have some question and answer and some good discussion, hopefully among all the panelists. So I am your moderator. My name is Risa Domino, and I'm with Resource Recycling Systems. As I mentioned, Jason Peltz on Carton Council will talk about carton recycling access and what that industry's been up to. Lynn will come next and talk about expansion of food service packaging recycling through community access programs. And John Lair and Bill Dillerman will talk about glass recycling in Denver. So let's get started with Jason.
Thanks, Risa. So I'm Jason Peltz. I am the VP of Environment for Tetra Pak Americas and also the VP of Recycling Projects for the Carton Council. So thank you all for joining today. Next slide, please. So very quickly, the Carton Council, who we are, we're a group of manufacturers who got together a number of years ago because we felt that we had a valuable commodity in cartons that should not be going to the landfill but should be going into the recycling stream. So what you see here are the 4 primary members of the Carton Council plus Nippon Dynawave, which is the old or the new version of Weyerhaeuser Liquid Packaging, who's an associate member. Next slide, please. So what our goals are, really there's 2. One is to increase access and the other is to increase participation, in both cases, to really drive recycling and grow recycling rates for cartons. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of an idea about cartons, it's a term that's used about a number of different things, but what we're specifically talking about are food and beverage cartons, and they're made mainly of paper, which is we see as a renewable resource. They're light, they're compact, they have a very low carbon footprint, and they're recyclable. Next slide, please. And the 2 types of cartons we typically talk about in this are, one is the refrigerated carton, which many of us, specifically in the U.S., have grown up with as the traditional milk carton. 1 layer of paper and 2 layers of poly, goes in the fridge from start to finish. The other carton we're talking about is an aseptic carton, which has an additional layer of aluminum mixed in, which allows it to be both be distributed at ambient temperature. One key point here, we still today see people call them waxy or wax cartons. Wax has not been on a carton for a long time, so we just always like to reiterate to people that that's not the case. What they're talking about is the polyurethane layer. Next slide, please. So when we look at carton recycling as a whole in the value chain, you know, the way we take a look at it is really from 5 points. You know, you have the portion at home, which is where people are able to put their cartons into a bin for recycling, hopefully. Second part is the collection. You know, we take a look at how material is collected in different communities. The third piece is the sorting and baling. We very much focus on driving for cartons to be sorted into their own grade, which allows for the maximum recyclable benefit from them. Fourth is really connecting the generator of the material with the end user of the material. And then finally, we have recycling. And we've spent a lot of time, Carton Council, working with different avenues for recycling for cartons, not just traditional paper mills, but also some newer solutions. And I believe in one of the future seminars, they'll be talking a little bit more about that. Next slide, please. So in 2009, when the Carton Council really got going, we're worth things. There was basically one recycler of cartons in North America. About 20 million US households had access to carton recycling. That was only about 24 states, and that amounted to 18% of total US households. So that was, as I said, one of the main impetus of why we sat down as a group to decide that we needed to do something about that. Next slide. So when the group got together, the focus was where do we focus? And the idea was to work backwards from the markets because really we wanted to make sure that there was a pull that we had for the material. So we focused on building sustainable markets, sorting, collection, and then, as I had mentioned earlier, back to the household to make sure that we really covered it. So our journey over the last number of years has really been focused on all 4 segments of this. Next slide, please. So now, 8 years later, next slide, where we are. We're at, actually, this slide could be updated. We just got the most recent numbers. We're at 61.6% household access. We've got over 71 million households with access, over 13,000 communities. All but 1 state have access to carton recycling, 82 of the top 100 communities, and the end markets have actually improved with the number of recyclers in North America. Next slide, please. So to us, our original goal was really to achieve 60% household access. And why was that important? Well, in doing so, number one, as you see, the label now is a non-qualified label. Recycling cartons is now recognized as mainstream, which is critical to continue to drive recycling rates. As I said, the recycling logo can be used for all food and beverage cartons, again, without any qualifier. And it also allowed us to step away from individual targeted city campaigns and start to look at things from more of a regional basis and really create a national call to action. Next slide, please. So through all of this, we came up with a strategy, and I'll walk you through each of the 6, there's squares on the slide, of what we focus on and what our goals are. So next slide, please. So the first one was to expand household access, and again, just to reiterate, carton recycling is now mainstream. We're north of 61% access. What this shows you is where we came from and where we are now. Took a lot of work, you know, but we grew at 240% over where it was when we started. So we're very happy with that success. Next slide, please. And I guess the thing to say is that we're still here to help. And what I wanted to say is that when I showed you all, or when we talked about the slide of what our game plan was, then when I just showed that slide, we're not done. This is a journey. We've gotten through part of the journey, and we're going to continue to go on this journey because we believe that there's still more opportunity to grow both access and recycling for cartons. So Carton Council, what we're able to do and what we can offer is help from technical assistance, equipment grants. We can share best practices, and if you go within our website on cartonopportunities.org, there's a whole section dedicated to this to kind of look and see what we have available for help. Next slide, please. The second piece is talking about MRF performance. Next slide. So, obviously the MRF has to be a key stakeholder in this value chain, and we found that working with the MRFs, one of the biggest takeaways we've had is there is no silver bullet. Every MRF is different, even when you think they might be the same, and therefore the range of solutions can vary, and it varies based on size of MRF, what goes through the MRF, the folks running the MRF, location, and I'll be honest, it doesn't say it here, but much of the ingenuity that we've really seen through this has come from the MRF side. When you get a MRF operator working with us, a lot of great ideas come up. So this allows for the positive sort of cartons. It offers a range of solutions. It can be manual sort up to fully automated. And really it's matching the right solution with each MRF. And that's really sharing best practices that we've learned throughout our time working with various MRFs. But again, also taking the information that each MRF has specific to their location. Next slide, please. So again, we're here to help. As I mentioned earlier, there are grants to be had. We have capital equipment grants, and we look at each one on an individual basis. We also can act as a matchmaker, connecting the folks who produce the material once it is sorted and baled with the end users of the material. We can share best practices for optimal performance. And then finally, we also help with outreach. And I'll talk a little further on that at the end, but we want to make sure that we get the message out for people to know that they can recycle their cartons, which then drives more volume through the MRFs. Next slide, please. Growing recycling markets. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, we've been very busy as well on the other end of the spectrum, or the value chain, which is with regards to consumption. We've been working with both domestic and international markets. This is a commodity that we've seen growth domestically. We've seen growth within the North American market, but we've also seen growth for demand outside of the borders of the U.S. And that continues to be an important key for us with all three of those potential end locations, because obviously you have to have that demand to help drive and bring value to the infrastructure for carton recycling. Next slide, please. Schools and other institutions, and I will be very brief. Next slide, please. We do a lot with the schools, but there's going to be a webinar on this on the 16th that you should all sit through, and Derek does a great job really walking through all of the specifics of what we work on. What we see with schools is an opportunity to truly teach the kids from the beginning to establish a good habit for their lifetime, and also to come home and, for many of you who are parents, have them tell us the right thing to do as well to help drive recycling. Next slide, please. Next, legislative efforts. So in this case, we really do, we take a very active, but active from a standpoint that we are at the table. We want to make sure we're at the table. So we do a lot of monitoring of key legislative developments. We expand awareness and make sure that people understand where policy potentially could be a tool to drive recycling. We work with coalitions and we drive action. And again, this is something that we see as being an important piece to the overall puzzle of making sure we can be successful in our ultimate goal of growing carton recycling. Next slide, please. So then we come to increasing consumer participation. And next slide, please. So really what we do and what we've done over time, it's been a lot of trial and error. We've learned a lot, but we have the ability really to show some of the best practices for adding cartons to your material. You know, and some of this just highlights a few things, but you know, when we talk specifically about cartons and having them added to an individual community's site, we talk about making sure they're listed separately to really identify what they are. As detailed of a list as you can possibly have. Images are key, and one of the most important things actually to bring up, and we see this because depending on what part of the world actually you're in, you know, many parts of the world they flatten material, but here what we always make sure we tell people is to keep them in their original shape, because as many people know, the way MRFs are set up, it's done based on 3-dimension, which allows them to perform better through the system. Next slide, please. We also have a toolkit for communities, which can help with content. We offer FAQs, newsletter, email marketing. We can help with press releases. Next slide, please. You know, again, with the toolkit, we also have promotional tools. We've again, as I said earlier, we've had a bit of luck in the sense that we've had a lot of trial and error. So we believe that we've gotten very good, and we can offer a lot to communities when it comes to what type of ads or whether they should use bill stuffers or recycling guides, but really to promote the recyclability of cartons, making sure that they are once added to the list of acceptable commodities, that they're done correctly. Next slide, please. In addition to that, with assets, we have an image bank, we have videos, you know, there are quizzes that can be given as well. Again, just to really foster strong education for the consumer to know what to do. Next slide, please. And again, we're here to help. I mean, we have toolkits for communities. We have mini grants as well. Technical assistance we can offer. You know, we've again learned a lot. So because of that, that's information that we want to share and help people with. Again, to make sure that we keep the recycling of cartons growing. Next slide, please. And that's it. So if anybody has any questions specifically for us, you know, feel free. Here's our information. I believe this is going to be shared, so you'll have it. We'd be happy to help work with anybody as it relates to carton recycling. And that's all.
Thank you so much, Jason. Next up, we'll have Lynn Dyer from the Foodservice Packaging Institute, who'll talk to us a little bit about how they are working to incorporate food service packaging in collection programs. Lynn?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Risa. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing on the food service packaging side. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Foodservice Packaging Institute, we're actually a trade association. We've been around for over 80 years, and really our sole purpose is to focus specifically on food service packaging and advocate for the interests of the industry. From a membership standpoint, our members include both the converters of the packaging itself as well as their raw material suppliers and machinery folks. And all told, we include about 90% of the industry in our association. And then the other nice thing is we do offer a free membership for food service distributors and food service operators like your McDonald's and Starbucks and Chick-fil-A's of the world, or US Foods as well. So as the leading authority on food service packaging, we want folks to come to us with their questions. So if you go to the next slide, please. So we talk about food service packaging all the time, and honestly, one of the questions that sometimes people will ask us is, what in the heck are you talking about? So from our standpoint, food service packaging is really those items that you find in some sort of food service establishment. It might be a restaurant, it might be a cafeteria, it might be a coffee store, whatever it is. But typically that packaging is used for prepared foods and beverages. Many times those are actually on the go. So while food service packaging can be cups, containers, boxes, bags, cutlery, lids, straws, bags, you name it, wraps. For the purposes of our discussion here today and a lot of the work that we're specifically focusing on when it comes to recovery, it's really those items of cups, containers, boxes, and bags that we're focusing on. And the reason that we have limited it to that, at least initially, is that based on the research that we have done, those are the items that have the highest likelihood of actually getting recycled or composted because of, you know, the material that they're made out of, or their form or shape, or for a variety of reasons, and that's really the bulk of the material that's out there, so that's really why we're focusing on that. So when you think about food service packaging, that's what you're talking about. You know, the Carton Council has done a lot of wonderful work, and I often wish we had like just one or two products to focus on, but in our case, we're working on so many different types of products, whether it's both the product itself or the material, because in our case, it could, on the paper side, it could be a number of different paper substrates. On the plastic side, typically it's going to be a PET, a polypropylene, polystyrene, PLA. There are a number of different resin types on the plastic side. So, you think of everything that you have to do for cartons, it's what we've had to do, but just expand that for the various material and product types that we have. So if you go to the next slide, please. So really from our standpoint, what are we trying to do? It's develop and promote economically viable and sustainable recovery solutions for food service packaging. And by sustainable, I'm not talking about like green, environmentally friendly. I'm talking about like long term. That's really what we're trying to do. And when we started working on this back in 2011, you know, one of the things that we said is we want to look at all recovery options. So whether it's recycling, whether it's composting, whether it's energy recovery, you know, there is no silver bullet. Jason's right. It's going to be a different option depending on the product and where you're doing it. However, for the purposes of today's presentation, I'm really going to focus more on the recycling side, but certainly happy to talk to anybody about some of those different options as well. So next slide, please. So this slide really kind of gives you an update on all the work that we've been doing to date since we first started back in 2011, 2012. You know, I will tell you it was very difficult, and it has been very difficult because I think there are a lot of myths out in the marketplace on why you can or cannot recycle paper and plastic food service packaging. And so one by one, we've been taking a look at each of those issues and really trying to figure out, you know, is this a real issue? Is this a perceived issue? So for example, you know, things like one of the biggest issues that we would hear, and we still hear, is things like food residue. You know, I would say what we hear is that communities or MRFs or even end markets are concerned that if they decide to recycle food service packaging, that they're going to end up getting a lot more food contamination, and that's certainly not something that any of us want. And that actually led us to do a couple of different studies, one in Boston and one in Delaware, where we compared food service packaging compared to like cups, containers, boxes, and bags to like commonly recycled food packaging items. So not to split hairs there, but so you're talking about things like spaghetti containers or maybe peanut butter jars or whatever it happens to be. And in both cases, it was interesting because they actually found almost little to no difference between the amount of food residue on those items that the communities were already accepting versus some of these newer items like food service packaging in our case. So I won't walk you through everything, but we really have tried to go through looking at, you know, where can you collect the material? Is there food contamination? What's going to happen to it once it actually hits the material recovery facility? What bales is it going to end up in? And, you know, one of the biggest issues for us is, you know, are there end markets? And that's certainly one of the big issues and big topics that we're talking about currently is we know without any kind of end markets, we're not going to be able to have economically viable and sustainable solutions. So we want to make sure that we're working to develop those end markets if those are not there, or identify ones that we haven't found. And the fun thing is then we get to have the good times of how do you communicate that to residents. And so we've done things like a survey back in 2016 where we surveyed 1,000 different households across the country to get a better understanding of different terms and pictures that communities might use when communicating the recyclability of different types of products. So with that, let's move to the next slide and kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty. So with all this research behind us, what we've really moved to is a community partner program where we're looking to work with communities to get them to add food service packaging to their curbside recycling program. And I should say the reason we're focusing on curbside recycling in this case is that one of the initial pieces of work that we did is trying to figure out where to find it. And to be honest with you, if you think about a typical quick service restaurant, roughly 70% of the material leaves the store because so many people get their coffee or their hamburgers to go or through the drive-through or delivered or whatever it happens to be. The largest portion of food service packaging to be recovered is actually found in the home. So that's one of the reasons we're focusing on curbside. So when we go into a community and say, hey, would you like to add food service packaging, we want to make sure that we're ticking off all of the boxes. We want to make sure that there's community buy-in. We want to make sure that the MRF itself is really going to be able to process that material. Is it really going to flow into the right end markets? And are there end markets available for those bales to be sold to? And then once you really have all those pieces in place, then you can move to the next step. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So when we do get to that point, then it's things like we do like to put contracts into place so everyone has a good understanding of what the community or the MRF will be providing in terms of this partnership, but also what FPI can provide as well. We want to make sure we understand what kind of operational changes need to be made, if any, specifically to accept food service packaging products. Communications, that's really critical. We need to make sure that the residents understand that there's a change to their recycling program, and we need to make sure we understand when that's going to take place. You know, our recommendation is you do education outreach at the very beginning, but then also, you know, maybe 6 or 9 months down the line or a year down the line, just so people understand and they don't forget that you can add these materials. The next step would also then be to do some sort of kickoff event, and we have some pictures for you on the next slide. But you know, I think getting the city involved and the various partners involved, as well as the residents, really helps to accomplish all of that. And then we want to make sure that we're measuring and we understand the success we're having. So you know, let's make sure we work with the community as well as the MRF to make sure we understand from a tonnage standpoint, are we seeing that food service packaging coming in? Are we making sure that it's actually getting processed and not ending up as residue, and double checking and making sure we don't see additional contamination, because certainly that's not something that we want to see. So if you want to go to the next slide. So we're very excited that after a number of years putting all this research together and working with a number of different communities, we actually launched our first 3 communities just within the last month, actually. So back in September, we actually launched in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in the upper left-hand corner, and in that case, we had an official launch with the city, and then the next day, they happened to have a local community event, and so we had a tent and a stand there to really engage with the consumers or the residents to make sure they understood what was happening. The next for us was Washington, D.C. We were very excited about that one. That launch actually took place at an elementary school in Washington, D.C. that happened to be one of the more higher performing environmental schools in the district. And so we had a number of different folks from federal level all the way down, and to really talk about the importance of recycling and really mention the kids. And the kids have been kind of a theme throughout all 3 of the launches. The third one was in Louisville just 2 weeks ago. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is a picture of the mayor of Louisville, who came out to talk about the changes in the program, and they had a few kids from one of the local schools really talk about what was going on and what food service packaging was going to be added. And it was fantastic because the mayor had the kids chanting, you know, let's recycle our food service packaging. And so it was an exciting moment for us. So with 3 communities under our belt this year, we're certainly looking forward to working with more communities in the future. So if you want to move to the next slide. So let's talk about what kind of resources we have available for you. Next slide, please. So I'll go through these pretty quickly. So things like we have information sheets specifically for material recovery facilities. So if they have questions about, for example, all right, how much are we really talking? What kind of end markets do we have? Is it really going to process through my MRF? We have resources specifically for communities about our community partnership program, so they understand what types of products we're talking about and what are the expectations for working together. Next slide, please. Thank you. We just actually earlier this year launched a resident education toolkit, and this is really geared for communities specifically. We've got a flyer that we have designed that can be downloaded, and you can just update it by just adding your own website if those are all the materials that you're already collecting. They're very commonly recycled materials with food service packaging added as well. Just like Carton Council, we do have a photo gallery, so if you're interested in adding various food service packaging images, we know that's critical when you're communicating that. So those images are available for anyone to download and use. I mentioned that resident education survey. That survey is actually, the full results are available on our website. You know, so things like talking about pizza boxes. Yes, you can recycle your pizza boxes. Do MRFs, communities, and markets want an entire pizza in their pizza box? No. Do folks want beverages in their paper cups? No. But you know what we found are things like clean and empty resonated far more than food soiled paper. So trying to understand the best practices and some of the best terminology to use, you'll find that in the survey results as well as in the best practices that, again, you can download. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Just a picture of some of the pretty materials that we've designed that we could then use, you could use at some point as a community partner or down the line if you're interested in adding food service packaging. That's something that you would be able to use and with any of your residents. Next up, please. We also have a newsletter similar to a lot of other folks to just keep you up to date on some of the different work that's been going on in the recovery space for food service packaging, and that's free and available to you. So if you let us know, we can make sure we can include you on that semi-annual newsletter. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is really the treasure trove of all the information that we have been collecting since 2011, 2012, and that's on recyclefsp.org. You'll notice that there are 5 different areas depending on where your main focus is. So we actually have a whole toolkit specifically geared towards food service operators for those that are interested in adding in-store collection. We have a whole section for communities, for material recovery facilities, for end markets, as well as for composting and organic material recovery facilities. So really, no matter where you are in that whole chain, we have resources that are available to you. And again, we invite you to go to that recyclefsp.org website for more details. Next slide, please. And I think that's it. Any questions right now, or you want to hold off until towards the end? We can do that as well.
Thanks, Lynn. I think we are going to hold any questions until the end. Okay. Thanks so much. And for those of you out there, if you want to start shooting in some questions on what you've heard or some thoughts to spur discussion, go ahead and do that. And once we hear from John and Bill, we'll launch into that dialogue. So now we'll hear about how they've approached glass recycling in Denver from John from Momentum Recycling and Bill from Rocky Mountain Brewing.
Hello, everybody. This is John Lair, President of Momentum Recycling. Bill and I are going to kind of switch off here as we go through this presentation. We're going to tackle another hard to recycle material or one that can be hard to recycle in many communities. And we're going to talk about Denver in particular and how we've addressed it there. Let's move to the next slide. So let's set the stage a little bit first. So glass recycling in Denver, prior to our project, glass has been welcome in the single stream in the Denver area since 2005. There are 4 MRFs in the greater metropolitan area, kind of between Fort Collins and Colorado Springs. There's 4 main MRFs processing single stream. The glass that they separate out from the MRF is contaminated with non-glass material at rates between 10 and 40%. That's kind of the historical non-glass rate. There are 2 bottle manufacturers in the greater Denver area, Rocky Mountain Bottle Company, which Bill will speak to, established in 1970, and then there's an Owens, Illinois facility in north of Denver in Windsor, Colorado, established in 2005. Both of these bottle manufacturers have a desire for recycled glass, or cullet as it's known, but both of them require that cullet to be furnace ready, so it has to be clean enough and prepared enough to go directly into their furnaces along with the other virgin materials. So obviously when the glass coming out of the MRF is contaminated 10 to 40% and the user needs it furnace ready, there's a big gap there in the middle. So what has happened in this big time period from 2005 until very recently, the glass extracted from the MRF ended up in local landfills, either as alternate daily cover or as leachate or other beneficial uses as possible. So that was sort of the state of affairs. And now I'll back up and give you just a little bit of background on who we are. Next slide, please. So Momentum is a family-owned business. We started in 2008 in Salt Lake City. We simply want to divert material away from the landfill. That was our entire goal. We never intended to get into the glass processing business. We thought we would be kind of a service provider. Collecting and transporting glass waste for bar and restaurant customers was a popular service for us from the beginning. Here in Salt Lake City, the existing cullet processor was struggling to produce quality cullet for the local fiberglass insulation plant, and that led to service challenges in our business. The services that we could provide to our bar and restaurant customers were under threat, if you will. So we found ourselves sort of at a crossroads. Next slide, please. So in 2012, we decided to build a glass recycling plant in Salt Lake City. We had no prior experience in this, as I mentioned, so we learned a lot of stuff the hard way. But what it did is equipped us with the ability to recognize the ingredients necessary for a successful cullet processing business. So when we came to learn about the glass situation in Denver, which we learned about in early 2013, we realized that the ingredients there were ripe for us to get involved. So next slide, please.
Yes.
So Bill, I'll let you talk about, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Dillerman. I'm the plant manager at Rocky Mountain Bottle Company. RMBC is actually a joint venture operation here near Denver that's owned by both Miller Coors and Owens, Illinois Glass Containers. So our factory here operates 3 furnaces making both Flint and Amber beer bottles for Miller Coors in their network across the country. The plant here has an on-site cullet processing operation that was installed back in '92. We have some equipment that's capable of removing contamination, as John mentioned, from the mixed sources that we get locally here. But it's nothing like what John has in his operation in terms of effectiveness. A large percentage of our clean cullet, our furnace-ready cullet, comes in from out of state, actually by rail. Most of that's coming from Michigan because they're a bottle bill state. So back in about 2012, we started exploring installing optical sorting equipment similar to what John has in his plant here on site. We looked at that long and hard, but could not justify the cost to the operation, both in infrastructure and the changes we would have to make to our plant. So we were obviously ripe for any kind of source of clean cullet that we could find. You know, John came along, we introduced himself to us, and since then we have forged this partnership, which I think has been very beneficial. Next slide.
So this is John again. So after a number of years of planning and just working on this project, we were able to open the facility just this past year, almost a year ago. Now we opened this new glass processing facility in Denver. It has a capacity to process about 85,000 tons a year, which is somewhere around 700 to 7,500 tons per month. Let's see, next slide. The plant uses, as Bill said, the latest in technologies for cleaning and sorting glass. We partnered with European equipment manufacturers who have experience with hundreds of glass recycling plants around the world. We basically handed over the keys to them and said, you know, you guys are the pros, you design it, we'll build it. So we're able to take this contaminated glass from the MRFs and get it into a furnace-ready state for RMBC to use. Next slide. It was important putting this all together that we have kind of win-win relationships. I think that's key. All parties have to be getting some beneficial arrangement out of the relationship. Whether that's our relationship as the color processor with the 4 MRFs, we have to make life easier for them, so they want to do business with us and want to supply us with that material. And then the same is true with our partners like Bill and bottle manufacturing plants. We need to make sure they're getting a high-quality product and a reliable, predictable stream so that they can plan and be effective in their work as well. So key to our initiative, at least, was having these win-win partnerships. Next slide, please. So kind of fast forwarding to now, we are not at capacity in this plant, but we're well along. We're currently processing about 5,000 tons per month just from the local MRFs. There's 4 MRF partners that we have. We've provided about 4,000 tons of furnace-ready cullet to the bottle manufacturers. This was stuff that prior to this plant getting open was going to the landfill. And by just being able to do something with this MRF glass and turn it into a usable commodity, getting it back into bottles, this plant alone was able to increase the glass recycling rate in the state of Colorado from 6% to 26%. Yeah, next slide.
Yeah, and I guess the win for RMBC, obviously the cullet percentage has gone up, but also our energy use has gone down. I'll give you some stats. So far, we've been able to use about, this is through August, about 8,500 tons of mixed amber and green cullet from Momentum in lieu of bringing that same glass from Michigan. Our Michigan source, we would typically, in a normal year, use not quite 20,000 tons a year coming from out of state of the 60,000 tons of cullet we use each year. So that gives you a perspective of the volume that's coming from out of state. The 6,000 tons of flint cullet, which is the clear glass that John has cleaned up and produced for us, has allowed us to increase our percentage in our flint furnace from what was 10% overall cullet content to 22% pretty consistently. And that's led to a pretty significant energy savings on that furnace. And you know, that's been the value, to John's point, of a clean material for one thing, but ample supply and a growing supply, which is something we're looking forward to. Next slide. So John, I think this is yours.
Oh, sorry, I had my mic on mute there. Sorry. We think that we think of it as having stabilized glass recycling in the Denver area, you know, since all that material had been previously going to the landfill. But having done so, we're still only getting 26% of the waste. I mean, that's a big improvement, 6 to 26, but that means there's still, you know, 34% that's still going to the landfill. So there's a lot of progress to be made. So we are continuing to work with communities that are not recycling glass for whatever reason, whether they don't have access to single stream or not. We're helping those communities get access to glass recycling. We're also working with communities that have been doing single stream for a long time and helping them with different education programs to help drive the glass recycling rates up in those communities. Also with the commercial sector, bars, restaurants, multifamily, office buildings, etc. So we're continuing to reach outward as well as inward to drive that glass recycling rate up. So that's kind of where we're going from here. Next slide.
And I guess from RMBC's perspective, obviously we want to see Momentum continue to grow their business, their volumes coming in, translate into bigger volumes coming out, and that's a win-win for us. One of the things that's a big benefactor on this operation is that we've been able to hold the line on our batch costs, our raw material costs, by purchasing this furnace-ready cullet from a local source versus bringing it in from across the country. So it's a big deal for us. We hope to grow this business even more. It obviously means energy savings for us, and it actually prolongs the life of our furnaces as well. So that's our story. That's it for us.
Thanks so much. I think that was a great ending in that you guys really brought it home to some of the community benefits. And to get us started with our questions here, you talked about the benefits in terms of increased glass recycling and in terms of the improvements for Rocky Mountain Brewing and the ability to use local materials, which are terrific. Have you all quantified the economic benefits to the community, the job creation and handling these materials that's now local instead of importing, the disposal cost savings, things of that nature?
This is John. I'll start off with that. We haven't done a comprehensive look at this, but in some of the items you brought up, we certainly are aware of. For example, our facility in Denver employs about 17 or 18 people. You know, those were jobs that didn't exist before when the glass was going to the landfill. The trucking operations that were used previously to transport that material to the landfill still exist. They're just bringing it to us instead. So we've, you know, shifted the previous jobs that were there, so no jobs were lost, but then in addition we added about 17, 18 new jobs into the community just by having the facility there. But yeah, to your point though, I think it's important that we work with the municipal partners in the community to try and really get a firmer idea of the you know, long-term economic benefits. And Bill, I'll let you talk to quantifying them in your facility, in your operations.
Yeah, I think economics are big. As I mentioned earlier, we've got an opportunity to sustain our value here at the plant just because we're again trying to hold the line on our batch costs. Our virgin raw materials are coming from all over the country currently by rail and by truck. We don't recycle near what we could. Our overall percentage in this plant, for instance, between the three furnaces is roughly 29%. So 29% of the raw material that's going in these furnaces is recycled glass, and the rest is virgin raw materials. And so we're pretty adamant that we want to try to make that bigger. We could recycle 70% content if we could get it. We just haven't had the source here in Colorado up before now to get that cullet here economically. So we would expect that this has a lot of benefits for us outside of raw material costs as well, the energy savings, but then the life of our assets, because when we're melting cullet versus sand, we're able to run these furnaces at a lower temperature, and that obviously prolongs the life of these melters, and that's one of the big selling points for us, to try to up the content above and beyond what we've been able to do so far.
Yeah, I'll jump in with one more comment. One of the other critical partners in this whole endeavor are the MRF partners. We've talked about that a little bit. I know, and this is back to our desire to have these win-win relationships with our partners. I know that at the MRF, this was a cost before. Glass was a cost to the MRF, and of course that trickles down to the municipal contracts that cities have with these MRFs. Well, we've been able to take that cost and flip it around to a revenue source for them. So glass is slowly, at least in Colorado, right? Glass is going from being kind of an unwanted stepchild to being a desired, you know, revenue-generating, beneficial component to the stream and the MRF. And again, that will trickle into the municipal partners. So in communities where, you know, you guys have been struggling with glass, if there's an opportunity to take a fresh look at it, you know, one of the things we've heard a lot about is commodity prices. the issues coming out of China and the impacts we've had on commodity prices. Glass isn't subject to any of that. Glass is very predictable. It's very stable. Since your markets have to be local because it's so heavy, prices don't fluctuate with commodities markets. So if you can find a way to harness that glass and get it out of the MRFs will win, the cities will win, and the local end users like Bill's plant will also win.
Thank you. Jason or Lynn, do you have anything you want to add in terms of capturing economic benefits from adding your materials to recycling?
I mean, I'll just say real quickly, we really haven't, it's hard for us to look at it on an overall. I think that in each case where we've had discussions with the different stakeholders, that's one of the things that we obviously take into consideration. You know, making sure that there is a value to doing it, and but I don't have an overall breakdown of what the total number is, but it is something we take into consideration and we work with when we sit the stakeholders down to make sure that that's considered.
Great.
And I would agree with everything Jason just said.
All right, thanks. Lynn, the next question's for you. One of our listeners says that most of the food packaging you talked about is not recyclable at their local MRFs. Can you speak to what areas of the U.S. are there regional areas where there's more food service packaging recycling happening, or is there another way for this listener to plug into what they might be able to do to move that in their area?
Sure, absolutely. Well, number one, of course, reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to talk to them directly. And to be honest with you, as I shared earlier on in the presentation, it really does depend on what you're talking about in terms of both the product and the material type. I will tell you that, one of the things that we have seen is that on the paper side, there are far fewer communities that accept paper food service packaging than plastic food service packaging at this point. And one of the reasons one of the things we're doing specifically on that is making sure there are end markets for those materials. So for example, we know we need to have those paper mills be able to accept the materials from the MRFs, no matter what kind of bale it happens to come in. So it might be in a mixed paper bale, it might be in a sorted office paper bale, who knows the bale, it depends on that MRF. But one of the things that we just finished doing is mapping out mills to understand where those mills might be that would accept our food service packaging products in those bales. So I'd be happy to speak specifically to that, but I can tell you that, at least based on what we're seeing, typically upper Midwest and the Southeast, more so than any other location at this point. But again, happy to talk to that individual community when they're ready.
Great, thank you. So we are coming right up to 3 o'clock. We did get a question on bar and restaurant glass recycling for John at Momentum, but I'm going to suggest that person jump on the next, and others jump on the next conference call, the next webinar, where we'll be having a full presentation on a bar and restaurant recycling program that'll answer all of those issues. And I'll just give each of the speakers the final word, a chance to say a quick word, maybe on what you're looking for in a partner, or what words of encouragement you have for the communities on the line.
This is Lynn. I'll just start by saying real quickly, we've done the hard work on the end markets and working with the MRFs, so now we're ready for the communities. So any of the communities that are interested in adding paper and plastic food service packaging, we'd love to talk to them.
Thanks, Lynn. Jason?
Okay. Yeah, all I was going to say, along the lines of what Lynn said, we've been at this for a bit, and we think we can help. So if there are any questions from any of the communities as it relates to Cartons, just let us know. We have a pretty good set of resources that we can help with, and always looking to have new champions join us.
Great. Bill?
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of a resource or of information, I think I'd encourage the group to explore. Glass Recycling Coalition was formed in 2016. It's actually a group of about 40 member companies who are collaborating to try to move glass recycling along in the North American area. But I'd encourage you to the website is glassrecycles.org, and there is a lot of good information that has been developed in there for municipalities and towns and states that have weighed in on issues they have, and they're different from state to state and town to town, obviously, but there's a lot of good resource information there. I'd encourage you to look that up. May answer some questions you have.
Thanks. And John, you get the last word.
Bill kind of took the words right out of my mouth. The Glass Recycling Coalition is a great resource, and certainly can provide some guidance for your individual communities. I guess I would also comment that we've learned that each community is unique. The factors surrounding glass recycling or the potential for glass recycling are different in every community. We've done a lot of this work, so please also feel free to reach out to me independently, and we can discuss the factors in your community and see maybe what can be done. Be happy to give you advice.
Thanks to all of you, and thanks to all the folks on the line. We appreciate your listening. We hope you learned something today, and we look forward to talking again on November 16th. Thank you so much.
Thank you.